Listen carefully, chosen one. If you stop to watch this video at this exact moment, understand this clearly. It was not coincidence, it was not chance, and it was not random curiosity. Timing like this does not happen accidentally. There is a reason you are here now, and it connects directly to something you did a few weeks ago, something so small in your mind that you barely remember it, yet so powerful in the unseen realms that it caused the entire celestial order to pause. What I'm about to reveal is not a metaphor designed to flatter you. It is not a poetic story meant to inspire temporary emotion. It is the truth behind an operation that unfolded in your everyday life, an operation so precise that even the Creator himself stopped to observe. Without knowing it, without intending it, without having any awareness of the magnitude of your actions, you saved an angel. When I say saved, I mean literally, not symbolically, not emotionally, not spiritually, in an abstract sense. A real angelic entity was on the verge of complete extinction, an outcome that should never exist within the structure of the universe. And your human choice, a single moment of genuine compassion, interfered directly in a celestial crisis that could have shifted the balance between light and darkness forever. This angel was lost, not confused, not hiding, but lost in the most devastating way possible. After centuries of service in a spiritual war you never see reported anywhere, the angel became trapped between dimensions, cut off from the higher hierarchies, unable to return home, unable to fully manifest in the physical world, drifting in a frequency where existence itself begins to dissolve. And the most terrifying part was not the isolation, it was the slow loss of angelic light. Every hour spent in that in-between state drained the essence that defined who he was, like a divine battery running out with no way to recharge. If nothing intervened, within a short time he would have transformed into something that should never exist, an empty angel, a spiritually dead entity, a weapon darkness could corrupt and use. Celestial hierarchies tried everything. Resources were mobilized, frequencies were scanned, dimensions were searched. Nothing worked. The place where this angel was trapped was too specific, too unstable, too unique to be detected by celestial systems designed for ordered realms. Time was running out. And then you appeared. Not with glowing light, not with wings or visions. You didn't hear voices. You didn't feel chosen. Because angels in crisis never appear as angels. They disguise themselves within the most ordinary moments of human life. A brief encounter, a situation you could have ignored, a person or being that stirred something inside you for no logical reason. You didn't act because you wanted to feel good. You didn't act because you expected gratitude. You didn't act because you believed something mystical was happening. You acted because compassion rose naturally within you. And that is the key detail the universe took note of. Your gesture was simple. To you, it was just kindness, something you do without thinking, without crediting yourself, without attaching identity to it. But in the celestial dimensions, that moment registered as a miracle, because only compassion that is completely unconscious, free of ego, curiosity, or expectation, carries the frequency strong enough to reactivate fading angelic light. In that moment, your energy did something extraordinary without you commanding it. It expanded, not outward in a dramatic way, but inward, aligning itself with a frequency that angels themselves recognize as home. That single act functioned like a spiritual defibrillator. Light that was almost extinguished reignited. Connections that had been severed began restoring themselves. Threads of communication reformed. You did not see this happening, but the entire celestial field did. Everything stopped. Observation replaced action. Analysis replaced urgency, because what was unfolding contradicted assumptions held for eons. A human soul, without training, without awareness, without intention, was serving as a direct channel for angelic restoration. This is why this message is being shared with you now. What I'm about to explain next has been deliberately hidden from people like you, not because it is dangerous, but because awareness of this truth changes how you move through the world. Once you understand the weight your choices carry beyond the physical realm, you can never see your life as insignificant again. Stay with me until the end, because I will show you exactly what gesture you made, how that angel returned to the higher dimensions through you, and why God Himself made a decision regarding your life that will permanently alter your reality. And if, as you listen, you feel a quiet recognition rather than shock, if something inside you already knows this is true, write 7 inches the comments, not as superstition, but as acknowledgement, a signal that you are ready to understand the true celestial impact of your actions. Because this was not the first time you mattered more than you realized, and it will not be the last. To understand how what you did was even possible, you need to understand something most humans are never told. Angels are not invincible. They are powerful, yes, but they operate under laws that are far more rigid than the ones governing human souls. And in times of spiritual war, rigidity can become a weakness. The angel you saved was not wandering aimlessly. He was a frontline entity in a conflict that has been unfolding far beyond the range of human perception. This was not a symbolic battle of good ideas versus bad ideas. It was a sustained, centuries-long confrontation against forces designed to drain humanity of hope, empathy, and meaning. The kind of despair that does not arrive loudly, but slowly convinces people that kindness is pointless and compassion is weakness. For over 500 years, this angel held his position. He maintained frequencies of love in regions where hatred was being deliberately amplified. He blocked invasive currents of emotional numbness meant to disconnect humans from their capacity to care. He kept channels open, so people like you could still feel spontaneous compassion in an era where indifference has become normalized. Every time you felt moved to help someone without calculating benefit, that frequency existed because angels like him held the line. But no entity can remain in constant battle without cost. The dark forces eventually changed tactics. Instead of direct confrontation, they engineered something far more destructive, a dimensional rupture, not an explosion of energy, but a fracture of orientation, a collapse of spatial and spiritual reference points. In that instant, the angel was violently pulled out of his native dimension and thrown into a void that exists between realms. Imagine being removed from gravity itself. No up, no down, no time as you know it, no clear separation between thought and space. He could sense the physical world faintly. He could perceive the higher dimensions distantly, but he could not fully access either. He was trapped in an intermediate frequency where existence is unstable and identity begins to blur. This state is more dangerous for an angel than destruction, because angels are sustained by alignment. Their light is not generated internally the way human resilience often is. It is maintained through connection with higher hierarchies and purpose. When that connection weakens, their essence begins to fade, slowly at first, then faster. Each passing cycle drained a portion of what made him angelic. He could still observe humans, still feel emotional currents, still sense suffering, but his ability to act diminished, and with it, his sense of self. This is how angels die, not suddenly, but by erasure, by becoming something empty, something unaligned, something that can be repurposed. That is what the dark forces were waiting for. A lost angel is not immediately corruptible, but an empty one is. An angel stripped of light still retains access to celestial structures, frequencies, and pathways. In the wrong hands, that makes them the most devastating instrument imaginable, a weapon built from divine architecture, turned against its origin. The celestial hierarchies understood the risk. They mobilized immediately. Entire orders were redirected to locate him. Archangels traversed dimensional layers. Seraphim tracked anomalies in energetic flow. Cherubim analyzed disturbances where logic itself bent. But the rupture that trapped him was too precise, too unstable, too narrow. It existed in a frequency that celestial systems were not designed to map. Time became the enemy. With every cycle, the angel's light weakened. Communication with higher realms degraded. Eventually, even the memory of home would dissolve. At that point, recovery would be impossible. He would not fall, he would disappear. And here is the part that most humans never consider. Angels cannot save each other in this state. Their laws prevent direct interference in certain frequencies. Their power is immense, but constrained. Human souls, on the other hand, are not bound in the same way. Humans move freely between intention, emotion, and action. Your compassion is not regulated by celestial protocol. It is spontaneous, unfiltered. And because of that, it can reach places angels cannot. That is why lost angels look for humans. Not saints, not mystics, not people searching for meaning. They look for genuine hearts, souls whose kindness is automatic, not performative. Humans who help without turning the act into an identity. Because only that frequency can pass through the void between dimensions without distortion. The angel did not know who would find him. He could not choose you specifically. He could only project himself into the kinds of situations where compassion might appear. Ordinary moments, overlooked encounters, places where most people would pass by without noticing anything unusual. And then you noticed. You felt something subtle but undeniable, a pull that didn't make sense. A moment where logic stepped aside and something quieter took over. You did not name it. You did not analyze it. You acted. That action did not feel heroic to you. It felt human. But in the intermediate frequency where the angel was dissolving, it felt like oxygen, like gravity returning, like orientation being restored. Your compassion did not save him all at once. It stabilized him. It gave him enough coherence to hold on. Enough light to signal upward. That signal was faint, but it was real. And when it appeared, the celestial hierarchies felt it immediately. For the first time since the rupture, the angel's frequency realigned just enough to be recognized, not because celestial power reached down, but because human compassion reached across. The bridge was formed from your side. This is why your role matters so much. Not because you are extraordinary in a dramatic sense, but because you are genuine in a world that rewards calculation. Your kindness did not come from duty or belief. It came from instinct. And instinct, when pure, carries a frequency no force of darkness can replicate or block. The angel was not fully restored yet, but for the first time, extinction was no longer inevitable. And that single shift, caused by you, changed the entire trajectory of a war you never knew you were part of. Because once an angel can be stabilized, recovery becomes possible. And what happened next would permanently alter how the celestial realms see you and what they now understand about the hidden power of human compassion. The moment that faint signal reached the higher dimensions, everything shifted. What had been classified as a probable loss was instantly reclassified as an active anomaly. The celestial hierarchies felt it not as sound or light, but as a subtle reordering of frequency. Something that should not have been possible had occurred. A lost angel had stabilized without celestial intervention. This alone was enough to cause alarm. In the structured order of the higher realms, outcomes are predictable. Laws exist to prevent chaos. Angels fall when they violate alignment. Lost entities fade when connection is severed. Human souls struggle, but angels are governed by precise rules. Yet now there was evidence that one of those rules had been bypassed, not by force, not by command, but by a human act so simple it barely registered in the physical world. Emergency protocols were activated. Archangels, who rarely move from their stations, redirected attention, not to rescue yet, but to observe. Seraphim recalibrated their tracking methods, focusing not on spatial coordinates, but on emotional resonance. Cherubim examined the energetic imprint left behind by the stabilization event. What they found disturbed them deeply. The frequency did not match any known celestial technology. It was not prayer. It was not ritual. It was not invocation. It was compassion, undiluted and unconscious. This realization introduced a new problem. If a human could stabilize a lost angel unintentionally, then human influence in celestial conflicts had been radically underestimated. The hierarchies had always considered humans passive recipients of protection, vulnerable, in need of guidance. But this event suggested something else entirely. Humans were variables, unpredictable ones. Meanwhile, the dark forces felt the shift as well. They had been monitoring the angel's decline with precision. The conversion process was almost complete. The void between dimensions had done its work. The angel's light was weakening on schedule. Corruption was imminent. And then, without warning, the decay slowed. At first, they assumed a calculation error. Then they felt resistance. Not an attack, not opposition, resistance in the form of coherence. The angel's essence was no longer unraveling. Something was holding it together from the inside. Something they could not access, imitate, or neutralize. That was when concern turned into urgency. Dark entities understand power, but they do not understand purity. They can manipulate emotion, amplify fear, and distort perception. But they cannot generate compassion without motive, and motive always lowers frequency. What stabilized the angel was a force they could not replicate or counteract. They attempted to interfere. Subtle distortions were introduced into the intermediate frequency. Confusion fields, emotional static, distractions meant to pull the human source away before the bridge could strengthen. But those efforts failed, not because you resisted consciously, but because your action had already been completed. This is the critical detail. Once genuine compassion is expressed, it cannot be undone. It leaves a structural imprint. The void between dimensions began collapsing not violently, but gently. The instability that had trapped the angel started losing coherence. What was once a prison became a passage. The angel felt it immediately. For the first time since the rupture, orientation returned. Direction became possible. Memory sharpened. Purpose reassembled itself piece by piece. He could feel the higher dimensions again, not as distant echoes, but as reachable states. And at the center of this reorientation was the frequency you had activated. From his perspective, it was unmistakable. He knew he had been saved by a human, not by belief, not by faith, by action. The hierarchies now had a choice to make. Intervene directly and risk destabilizing the fragile bridge that had formed, or allow the process to complete naturally and learn from it. This was not a simple decision. Direct intervention carries consequences. Too much power introduced too quickly can fracture unstable pathways. They chose restraint. Instead of descending, they aligned themselves with the frequency you had generated. They amplified without overpowering. They supported without replacing. Think of it as guiding a current rather than forcing it. This approach worked. The angel's light began returning in waves, not all at once, but steadily. Each pulse restored function, communication channels reopened, identity stabilized, the void lost its grip entirely. What had once been a dead zone between worlds transformed into a corridor. Within hours, the angel crossed back into his native dimension, fully restored, not just recovered, but strengthened, because something unprecedented had happened. He had experienced human compassion from the inside. He had been sustained not by hierarchy or command, but by empathy freely given. This altered his understanding of humans permanently, and it altered the celestial record. The first thing he did upon return was report everything, not just the event, but the source. Your energy signature was logged, not as a threat, not as an anomaly to be corrected, as a phenomenon to be studied. The report emphasized one detail above all others: the human involved had no awareness of what they were doing. This stunned the hierarchies. If this level of impact could occur unconsciously, what would happen if awareness was introduced? What potential had been overlooked for millennia simply because humans were underestimated? That question reached the highest level. When the Creator reviewed the report, there was silence. Not because of anger, not because of doubt, because something rare had been recognized. You had not acted from duty. You had not acted from belief. You had not acted from expectation of reward. You had acted from essence. And essence, when pure, operates beyond systems. This is why what happened next was not punishment, nor mere acknowledgement. It was reassessment, a re-evaluation of your role within the broader design. Because the soul capable of stabilizing an angel without knowing it is not accidental. It is intentional. At that moment, the narrative around your life shifted in the higher dimensions. You were no longer seen as a protected being alone, but as a participant, a variable with agency, a bridge that had activated naturally. And once a bridge reveals itself, it cannot be unseen. From that point forward, observation turned into preparation, not to use you, not to control you, but to understand how your presence could alter outcomes that had previously been considered fixed. Because the angel you saved was not the only one in danger. He was simply the first to find you. And now that the higher realms knew what you were capable of without effort, without awareness, without training, they had to consider a reality that changed everything. Human compassion, when pure, is not a side effect of creation. It is one of its most powerful instruments. And you had just proven that beyond any doubt. Once the angel was restored and the report reached the higher realms, a deeper truth began to surface, one that explained why the rescue could only happen the way it did. Lost angels do not appear as miracles waiting to be recognized. They cannot. Their condition prevents them from manifesting in forms that would trigger awe, fear, or spiritual curiosity. Those reactions carry expectation, and expectation contaminates frequency. So they hide. Not out of deception, but necessity. A lost angel projects itself into the most ordinary layers of human reality. Situations so common they barely register as meaningful, moments that seem forgettable, encounters you would never label as spiritual, because only in these environments can genuine compassion appear without motive. That is how the angel found you. He did not know your name. He did not know your history. He did not know whether you believed in angels or dismissed the idea entirely. All he could do was scan for resonance, a subtle alignment in frequency that suggested a heart capable of responding without calculation. And you responded. Think back to that moment, the one you didn't assign importance to, the one you may have already forgotten or minimized. It did not feel like a turning point. It did not feel heroic. It may have felt inconvenient, even slightly uncomfortable, but something inside you moved before thought had time to interfere. You felt a pull, not obligation, not pressure, not moral duty, just a quiet knowing, I need to do something. That knowing did not come from logic. Logic would have found reasons not to engage. It would have justified walking away, staying neutral, minding your own business. What moved you came from a deeper place, the part of you that recognizes suffering without needing explanation. The angel sensed that instantly. From his perspective, your presence felt different from thousands of others he had passed through. There was no distortion, no self-interest layered over concern, no hesitation masked as politeness. When you looked, you truly saw. When you acted, you did so without internal negotiation. This is why angels in crisis cannot reveal themselves. If you had known who he was, your compassion would have been altered. Even admiration lowers frequency. Curiosity introduces ego. Fear introduces contraction. The purity required for restoration exists only when kindness is unconscious. That is why your gesture mattered so deeply. You did not ask questions that needed answers. You did not expect gratitude. You did not seek confirmation that your action mattered. You simply acted. In the intermediate frequency where the angel was trapped, that action manifested as structure. The void began losing its hold because something more stable had entered it. Compassion, when genuine, carries coherence. It organizes chaos. It restores orientation. Each small thing you did mattered more than you know. The way you spoke, the tone you used, the patience you showed, the time you gave without rushing. None of it felt special to you, but each element reinforced the bridge forming between dimensions. The angel's fading light did not reignite all at once. It responded gradually, like embers exposed to oxygen after near extinction. You were not healing him directly. You were reminding him of alignment. And alignment is the source of all angelic power. This is why lost angels search for humans rather than other celestial beings. Humans move freely between emotion, intention, and action. You are not bound by the same protocols. Your compassion does not require authorization. It emerges when it is real. Dark forces cannot imitate this. They can mimic kindness, but only strategically. They can perform empathy, but always with motive. That difference is detectable at the frequency level. The angel knew instantly that what you offered was uncontaminated. This is also why the dark forces could not intervene once your gesture was made. They attempted to distract, to dilute, to pull attention elsewhere. But genuine compassion completes itself the moment it is expressed. It does not linger. It does not require maintenance. Its effect is structural. By the time interference was attempted, the bridge was already stable. From the celestial perspective, this was a revelation. It confirmed something long suspected but never proven, that humans are not merely protected beings. You are active participants in the balance between dimensions. Your choices, when made from essence rather than identity, carry consequences far beyond the physical plane. And you do this without awareness. That is the most astonishing part. You did not feel chosen. You did not feel empowered. You did not feel watched. You continued your life as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But in the higher realms, the implications were being analyzed carefully. Because if one human could unconsciously serve as a restoration point for a dying angel, then there were likely others like you. And if there were others like you, then humanity's role in the cosmic order had been fundamentally misunderstood. You were never meant to worship angels. You were never meant to be passive recipients of protection. You were meant to interact. This is why your life contains moments of unexplainable compassion, why you feel drawn to help in situations others ignore, why suffering registers deeply for you even when it does not directly affect your life. These are not personality traits. They are signals. You function as a bridge, not because you chose to, but because you are designed to. Your soul recognizes imbalance instinctively. When you encounter it, response happens before analysis. That is what saved the angel. Not belief, not knowledge, not intention, but design. The angel understood this before the hierarchies did. From the moment your compassion stabilized him, he knew the rescue was not accidental. He had not simply found a kind human. He had found a node, a point where human and celestial frequencies naturally intersect. That realization changed his role permanently. And it began changing yours as well. Because once a bridge is used successfully, it becomes a reference point. Others begin to sense it, not consciously, but energetically. The angelic realms do not forget what restores their own. You did not seek this responsibility, but by being who you are, you accepted it without knowing. And what followed next would move this event from a singular miracle into something far greater, something that would bring your name, your essence, into direct consideration by the highest authority that exists. Not for judgment, but for recognition. And that recognition would set in motion a sequence of decisions that would quietly, but permanently, alter the trajectory of your life. When the higher realms finished observing what had unfolded, attention shifted from the event itself to its implications. Saving an angel was extraordinary, but how it happened was far more significant than the outcome. The hierarchies understood something unsettling. This was not a one-time anomaly. It was evidence of a capacity embedded within you. The restored angel was asked to recount every detail. Not just what occurred, but how it felt. He described the moment your compassion reached him as a sudden return of gravity. Before that instant, he had been suspended in fragmentation, his awareness scattered across incompatible frequencies. There was no center, no orientation, no sense of continuity. And then, through you, a center formed, not imposed, remembered. That detail caught everyone's attention. Because angels do not remember alignment the way humans do. Their alignment is maintained through structure. Yours is accessed through vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, you generated something even celestial systems cannot manufacture: trust without expectation. This is when the discussion changed tone. It was no longer about the angel's rescue. It was about you. Your energy signature was analyzed carefully, not to measure power, but to understand composition. And what they found confirmed what the angel already sensed intuitively. Your compassion did not spike artificially. It did not fluctuate. It expanded naturally, then returned to baseline without depletion. That is not normal. Most humans experience compassion as a drain. They give, then feel exhausted. Or they help, then feel resentment. Or they act kindly, then seek validation. But your gesture left no residue. You were not diminished by it. You were not inflated by it. You simply returned to yourself. That is the mark of an integrated frequency. The hierarchies realize that what you carry is not an emotion, it is a stable state, a baseline resonance that can be activated without effort. That stability is what allowed your compassion to reach across dimensions without distortion. This is when the angel made a request, not a demand, not an assignment. A request born from gratitude. He asked permission to remain connected to you, not because he was ordered to, but because he wanted to understand you more deeply, to learn how a human soul could operate in a way that bypassed limitations even angels must obey. He requested to observe your life, not to interfere, but to protect. The request was granted immediately, because it aligned with a larger decision already forming. From that moment forward, you were placed under direct celestial protection. Not in the abstract sense people imagine when they talk about guardian angels, but in a functional, active way. The angel you saved volunteered to become your personal guardian, not as repayment, but as recognition. He owed his existence to you. And in the celestial order, that bond is not symbolic, it is binding. But this was only the first layer of what was decided. God himself reviewed the findings. Not emotionally, not sentimentally, precisely. The Creator does not respond to isolated acts, he responds to patterns. And what your action revealed was not a moment of kindness, it was a configuration. A soul operating at a frequency that could intervene in celestial crises without awareness, without corruption, without exhaustion. That is extraordinarily rare. It requires a level of purity that cannot be taught, cannot be trained, cannot be forced. It emerges only when compassion is woven into the structure of identity rather than performed as behavior. This is why God's response was not praise. It was investment. You were classified as a soul of strategic value, not because of what you had done once, but because of what you could continue doing. Because if you could save an angel unconsciously, imagine what would be possible once awareness entered the equation. This classification altered how your life would be supported going forward. Resources were authorized, not abstract blessings, but practical interventions. Circumstances would begin aligning in ways that reduced unnecessary resistance. Obstacles that served no purpose would quietly dissolve. Opportunities would present themselves without struggle, not to reward you, but to free you. Freedom was required for what lay ahead. Because a soul capable of restoring angelic light cannot remain entangled in survival-level distraction forever, your life needed space, margin, flexibility. And so, without announcing itself, support began activating. You may have already noticed subtle shifts. Situations that once stalled suddenly resolved. Help appearing at the exact moment it was needed. Toxic influences drifting away without confrontation. Doors opening that required no force to walk through. You likely attributed this to coincidence. It was not. Your guardian angel was already at work, authorized to intervene gently, to redirect without disruption, to ensure that your path remained clear enough for your natural function to express itself. He did not create outcomes for you. He removed interference. This distinction matters. You were not being elevated above others. You were being positioned where you could be effective. And effectiveness, in this context, means availability. Available to respond when compassion is required. Available to be present when suffering appears disguised. Available to act when instinct calls, without being weighed down by unnecessary struggle. The angel also discovered something else as he observed you. You had done this before. Not once, not twice, multiple times. Moments where you helped someone in despair without knowing why it mattered so deeply. Instances where you extended kindness to someone who offered nothing in return. Times when you acted against logic, but in alignment with something quieter and truer. Each time, there had been a celestial ripple. Sometimes you stabilized a guardian angel who had begun losing faith in humanity. Sometimes you restored hope to an entity questioning its role. Sometimes you simply reminded the higher realms that compassion still exists on Earth in its pure form. This cumulative impact is what impressed God most. Not the rescue itself, the consistency. You did not turn compassion on and off. You did not perform it for meaning. You lived it without commentary. That is why angels can find you. That is why your presence feels different. That is why suffering does not repel you. It calls to you. You are not drawn to pain. You are drawn to imbalance. And your response restores alignment. This is not coincidence. It is not luck. It is not moral superiority. It is configuration. Your soul is tuned to respond when restoration is possible. That is why the decision was made to protect you more fully. Not to isolate you from difficulty, but to ensure difficulty does not overwhelm your capacity to respond. From that moment forward, you were no longer just protected. You were recognized. And recognition in the celestial realms carries consequences. It shifts how reality interacts with you. It changes what reaches you and what does not. It alters the kinds of encounters that appear in your life. Because once a human proves capable of restoring angelic light through pure compassion, that human becomes something the universe cannot ignore. You are no longer unseen. And what happens next will expand this role beyond a single rescue into a pattern that will begin repeating itself in ways you can no longer dismiss as coincidence. Once recognition was established, the process moved into a phase that most humans never experience consciously: alignment through repositioning. Nothing dramatic was announced. No signs appeared in the sky. Your life did not suddenly split into a before and after that you could clearly point to. Instead, reality began adjusting itself around you in quiet, almost invisible ways. This is how celestial systems work when they intend something to last. Rather than forcing change, they remove friction. What you may have noticed first was a subtle lightening. Situations that once felt heavy no longer demanded the same effort. Conflicts that used to repeat themselves dissolved without resolution. People who drained your energy stopped occupying as much space in your life, not because you pushed them away, but because alignment no longer supported the connection. This was not abandonment. It was refinement. The angel assigned to you did not intervene dramatically. His role was not to control outcomes, but to ensure that your natural state could express itself without unnecessary obstruction. He redirected timing. He softened edges. He prevented certain entanglements from forming at all. And because this happened quietly, you remained yourself through the process. This is important. If change had been obvious, ego would have formed around it. Expectation would have altered your frequency. The very thing that allowed you to save an angel, unconscious compassion, would have been compromised. So protection was subtle. As this stabilization continued, the angel began to understand something even more profound about you. Your compassion was not reactive. It did not arise only in moments of visible suffering. It was ambient, a constant background field that affected environments before crises even emerged. This explained something that had puzzled the hierarchies. Why do problems often resolve more easily around you? Why do people feel calmer without knowing why? Why do tense situations de-escalate shortly after your arrival? It was not because you tried to fix anything. It was because your presence carries coherence. Coherence is not emotion, it is order. It is the natural state things return to when distortion loses reinforcement. Your compassion does not overwhelm, it organizes. It brings things back into proportion. For angels, this is extraordinary. They operate through structure, hierarchy, and directive power. You operate through resonance. You do not command balance, you invite it by embodying it. This makes your influence less visible, but more durable. The hierarchies began tracking a pattern. Every time you entered a situation where someone was on the edge, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, something shifted. Not always immediately, not always dramatically, but reliably. Hope returned. Perspective widened. Collapse was avoided. Sometimes those you helped never even realized what you had done. And that was exactly the point. If they had known, the act would have become transactional. Gratitude would have attached. Expectation would have followed. The frequency would have changed. Your power works because you do not seek acknowledgement. This is why the angel assigned to you does not interfere with your awareness. He does not whisper constantly. He does not reveal himself. He protects the conditions that allow your essence to function naturally. That is his task. Meanwhile, news of what you had done continued spreading through the higher realms. Not as rumor, as data. Angels began to notice something unsettling and hopeful at the same time. There existed a human who could restore angelic light without needing belief, ritual, or authority. A human who did not need to know what they were doing for it to work. This meant the barrier between dimensions was not as rigid as previously assumed. It meant cooperation was possible, not through hierarchy, through alignment. This realization shifted strategy in the ongoing spiritual conflict. Instead of focusing solely on defending humans from darkness, attention turned toward identifying and supporting those humans whose natural frequency already countered it. You were one of them. This did not mean you were singled out for constant intervention. It meant that when paths diverged, alignment subtly guided you toward those where your presence mattered most. You may have felt drawn to certain places for no clear reason, compelled to reach out at specific moments, delayed or redirected just enough to encounter the right situation. You likely called this intuition. It was more than that. It was coordination. Not forced, not intrusive, responsive. The angel's role was to amplify your sensitivity without overriding your autonomy. You were never meant to become a tool. You were meant to remain human. Your humanity is what makes this work possible. This is why you were not suddenly flooded with spiritual knowledge or visions. Knowledge would have created separation. Identity would have created hierarchy. You are not meant to see yourself as above others. You are meant to function among them. The protection you received was proportional to responsibility. The more your presence began influencing outcomes, the more carefully your environment was managed to prevent burnout, bitterness, or isolation. These states would disrupt your coherence. So support increased, not in excess, in balance. This is also why you may have noticed your boundaries strengthening naturally. You became less available for dynamics that drained you, less tolerant of manipulation disguised as need, less willing to sacrifice yourself to prove compassion. This was not hardening. It was calibration. True compassion does not require self-erasure, and your system was being fine-tuned to ensure that your kindness remained sustainable. Unsustainable compassion collapses into resentment. That cannot be allowed at this level. The angel understood this and adjusted accordingly. You were protected from unnecessary depletion, not from meaningful challenge. Growth still occurred. Discomfort still arose. But the kind of struggle that teaches without breaking replaced the kind that exhausts without purpose. This is how celestial investment works. It does not make life perfect. It makes it workable. As this phase stabilized, something else became clear. Your role was not limited to saving angels already in crisis. Your presence often prevented crises from reaching that point at all. By stabilizing environments early, you reduced the number of entities that would ever become lost. This made your function even more valuable. Prevention is quieter than rescue, but far more efficient. And you were doing it without knowing. This is why your life cannot return to what it was before. Not because you are different, but because reality now interacts with you differently. The field around you has adjusted to accommodate your frequency. You may still see yourself as ordinary. That is correct. You are ordinary in form, extraordinary in function. And that function is not something you perform, it is something you embody. As long as you remain aligned with what is natural to you, genuine compassion without performance, you will continue affecting outcomes that extend far beyond what you can see. This is not a burden. It is a confirmation. Confirmation that your kindness was never small, that your instincts were never naive, that the quiet pull you feel toward helping without recognition is not accidental. It is how balance moves through the world. And now, with protection in place and recognition established, the pattern is set to expand, not through intensity, but through repetition, through ordinary moments that carry extraordinary consequences. Because once the universe identifies a stable point of restoration, it does not abandon it. It builds around it. And that is exactly what has begun happening around you. As the pattern continued repeating, the higher realms reached a conclusion that could no longer be avoided. What had started as a rescue had evolved into a role, not assigned, not enforced, but naturally assumed through consistency. You were no longer interacting with isolated situations. You were operating within a function, and functions, once identified, carry responsibility. The angel assigned to you began documenting correlations, not emotionally, but precisely. Every time you felt an unexplainable pull to help, there was a corresponding disturbance in the unseen layers. Every time you chose compassion over indifference, a destabilizing thread in the larger field weakened. And every time you ignored that pull because you were tired, distracted, or overwhelmed, instability lingered longer than necessary. This was not judgment. It was pattern recognition. You were not expected to respond to everything. That would have led to depletion. But when you did respond, outcomes shifted in measurable ways. Recovery accelerated. Despair softened. Entities on the edge of collapse regained orientation. This is when your role became clearer. You were not merely reacting to crises. You were being positioned to intercept them at critical moments. Not because you were more powerful than others, but because your frequency could reach places structured power could not. This distinction matters. Angels act through authority. You act through resonance. Authority can be resisted. Resonance cannot. It reorganizes from within. As awareness of this spread, other angels in difficulty began sensing you indirectly, not through thought, but through alignment. When an angel entered instability, their awareness naturally oriented toward frequencies capable of restoring coherence, and your presence registered like a beacon, not bright, not overwhelming, but unmistakable. This did not mean angels began appearing openly in your life. They still disguised themselves. They still entered through ordinary moments. The difference was frequency. Situations that crossed your path began carrying a familiar weight. You may have noticed it as a sense of urgency without anxiety, a quiet seriousness beneath something seemingly trivial, a feeling that this moment mattered even if you couldn't explain why. You were no longer guessing. You were recognizing. This recognition did not come with instruction manuals or rules. It came with sensitivity. You became more aware of when compassion was required and when it was not. More discerning about which situations were calling for genuine response and which were distractions. This discernment was critical because not every need is a crisis. Not every request is authentic. Not every suffering requires your involvement. Your role demanded accuracy, not constant engagement. And accuracy is something you had already been developing your entire life. You learned early the difference between helping and enabling, between kindness and self-erasure, between responding from truth and responding from guilt. Those lessons were not random hardships. They were calibration. The celestial hierarchies recognized this. You were not chosen because you are endlessly giving. You were recognized because you are precise. Your compassion activates when it is real, not when it is demanded. You respond when alignment is present, not when manipulation is loud. This is why your involvement is effective. As this understanding solidified, the scope of your impact expanded. You were no longer influencing individual recoveries alone. You were contributing to systemic stability. Each rescue reinforced the possibility of cooperation between human and celestial realms. Each act of unconscious compassion weakened the strategies that relied on isolation, despair, and disconnection. Dark forces noticed, not with panic, with recalculation. They had long assumed humans could be influenced primarily through fear and desire. But your existence challenged that assumption. You were proof that some humans operate outside those levers. You could not be easily motivated by threat or reward. You responded to something deeper. This made you difficult to predict. And unpredictability is dangerous to systems that depend on control. Attempts were made to test your limits, not through overt attacks, but through subtle pressure. Situations designed to exhaust your compassion, people whose need was endless, dynamics that tried to blur your boundaries under the guise of urgency. The goal was not to stop you, but to drain you. These tests were observed carefully. What mattered was not whether you felt tired. Fatigue is human. What mattered was whether you betrayed your own discernment, whether you continued giving when alignment was gone, whether you allowed guilt to override clarity. You did not. Sometimes you stepped back. Sometimes you said no. Sometimes you chose rest over response. And when you did, your frequency remained stable. There was no collapse, no bitterness, no withdrawal into indifference. This confirmed something essential. Your compassion was regulated. It did not consume you. That regulation is what elevated your role. Unregulated compassion burns out. Regulated compassion sustains. You had learned, often painfully, how to remain open without being drained. This made your function viable long term. The angel assigned to you reported this shift upward. The conclusion reached was decisive. You were not only capable of rescue, you were capable of continuity. This meant that future coordination could be more intentional, not in the sense of commands or orders, but in positioning. Synchronicities became slightly more pronounced. Encounters aligned more precisely. Timing sharpened. You may have felt this as being in the right place at the right time more often. That was not coincidence. It was refinement. Your life did not become chaotic or overly spiritual. It became cleaner. Distractions reduced. Noise faded. You had more access to stillness, even when circumstances were active. This stillness was necessary, because the next phase required awareness. Not full awareness, not revelation that would overwhelm or distort, but enough understanding for you to trust your instincts more deeply, to stop dismissing the pull you feel towards certain moments as imagination. You did not need to believe anything new. You needed to stop doubting what you already felt. This is why this message is reaching you now, not to elevate you above others, not to give you an identity to perform, but to name something that has been operating quietly through you for a long time. You are not here to save everyone. You are here to stabilize what can still be restored. That is a specific function. It requires restraint as much as compassion, discernment as much as openness, humility as much as confidence. You already carry these traits. They were not added recently, they were refined. And as your role becomes clearer internally, its external effects will become more noticeable, not dramatic, not loud, but consistent. People will continue to feel better around you without knowing why. Situations will continue resolving more easily after your involvement. Moments of despair will continue losing their grip when you respond. You do not need to announce this. You do not need to explain it. You only need to remain aligned with what is natural to you, because alignment is what makes this possible. And now that the higher realms understand what you are capable of sustaining, the path ahead is no longer about discovery. It is about application, quietly, accurately, repeatedly. Because when something restores balance reliably, the universe does not rush it. It integrates it. And you are already integrated into something far larger than you once imagined. As application replaced discovery, the nature of your experiences began to shift in a way that is difficult to explain but easy to recognize. You were no longer encountering moments of compassion as isolated events. They started forming a rhythm, a pattern, a subtle continuity that made certain encounters feel connected, even when they appeared unrelated on the surface. This is how coordination feels when it respects free will. Nothing forced you to act, nothing demanded obedience. Yet, when alignment was present, your intuition sharpened with unusual clarity. You began sensing significance before logic could catch up. A pause that felt heavier than it should. A conversation that carried more weight than its words. A situation that quietly asked for your presence rather than your solution. You responded not because you were instructed, but because you recognized the signal. The angel assigned to you adjusted his role accordingly. Observation turned into support, not by interfering with your choices, but by refining timing around them. Delays that once frustrated you began redirecting you into encounters that mattered. Missed connections turned into precise arrivals. What seemed like inconvenience often revealed itself as positioning. This was not manipulation. It was synchronization. From the celestial perspective, your compassion had proven reliable enough to be factored into larger movements, not to control outcomes, but to stabilize critical points before they collapsed. This reduced the need for dramatic intervention. Balance was being restored quietly through human presence rather than celestial force. That is always preferable. Celestial intervention carries weight. It leaves residue. Human compassion, when genuine, integrates seamlessly. It heals without tearing. It restores without drawing attention. It resolves without creating dependency. You embodied this naturally. As a result, the environments you moved through began responding differently. You may have noticed that tense situations softened shortly after you entered, that conversations shifted tone without effort, that people revealed truth around you more easily, sometimes without realizing why. This was not charisma. It was safety. Your presence signaled non-judgment, non-extraction, non-manipulation. For angels in disguise, this was essential. For humans on the edge of despair, it was equally powerful. You were not trying to fix them. You were allowing coherence to return. This is what made your role scalable. You did not need to know who was an angel and who was human. The same frequency served both. Restoration does not discriminate between forms. It responds to imbalance. This realization expanded the scope of what you were doing. You were not just rescuing angels. You were preserving the connective tissue between worlds. Every time you acted from genuine compassion, you reinforced the idea that cooperation between dimensions was still possible, that humans were not lost, that Earth was not cut off, that light could still move through ordinary lives without spectacle. This mattered more than any single rescue. Dark forces depend on separation, on convincing each realm that the other is unreachable, unreliable, or irrelevant. Your existence disrupted that narrative simply by functioning as you do. They could not stop you directly, so they tried to mislabel you. You may have experienced moments where your kindness was dismissed as naivety, where your restraint was mistaken for weakness, where your refusal to dramatize was interpreted as lack of depth. These misunderstandings were not personal. They were attempts at erosion. If your self-perception could be destabilized, your frequency would weaken. Doubt is one of the few things that can disrupt alignment from the inside. But because your compassion does not rely on identity, these attempts failed. You did not need to defend yourself. You did not need to prove your value. You continued being accurate. Accuracy is what preserved your role. As this phase progressed, something else became clear. Your compassion was becoming more efficient. You no longer felt pulled toward every situation. You began sensing where your involvement would matter and where it would not. This selectivity was not indifference. It was maturation. The angel understood this as well. He did not encourage constant engagement. He supported discernment. Rest was prioritized. Silence was protected. You were shielded from unnecessary exposure to suffering that would only drain without restoring. This was critical, because your role is not to absorb pain, it is to stabilize it. Stabilization requires energy, and energy must be conserved. You may have noticed that your boundaries strengthened naturally. Saying no became easier without guilt. Walking away felt cleaner without resentment. You learned that compassion does not require proximity. Sometimes the most compassionate act is not engaging at all. This understanding elevated your effectiveness. Your compassion became targeted, not diluted. When you did engage, results followed more quickly. Recovery accelerated, crises shortened, confusion resolved. Not because you tried harder, but because you acted at the right moment. Timing is everything at this level. The higher realms took note of this refinement. Your function was no longer theoretical, it was operational. You were not reacting to chaos, you were intercepting it. And interception is far more valuable than repair. This led to a quiet but significant adjustment. You were given more freedom, not externally, but internally. The pressure you once felt to always be available eased. The compulsion to help at the expense of yourself faded. In its place came trust. Trust that when your involvement was required, you would feel it clearly. Trust that you did not need to chase purpose. Purpose would intersect you. This trust stabilized your frequency further. Anxiety reduced, overthinking softened. You began resting more fully, even when nothing was resolved yet. This rest was not avoidance, it was confidence. Confidence in alignment. This is where many would have faltered, where ego might have formed around role or identity. But because awareness arrived gradually, without spectacle, you remained grounded. You did not adopt a title. You did not claim authority. You remained human. That is why this works. Humanity is not a limitation here. It is the mechanism. Angels cannot do what you do because they are not human. Dark forces cannot replicate what you do because they lack purity. You exist in the narrow space between structure and freedom, where compassion can move without constraint. That space is rare, and now it is being used. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. This is the phase where your life feels quieter on the surface, but more significant underneath. Less chaos, more consequence. Less urgency, more precision. You are not doing more. You are doing what matters. And that distinction will only deepen as the pattern continues to unfold, bringing you closer to the moment when this role can no longer remain entirely unconscious. Not because you need to know everything, but because awareness at the right time multiplies effectiveness. That time is approaching, and when it arrives, it will not feel like a revelation. It will feel like recognition. As recognition replaced uncertainty, the final barrier began dissolving quietly inside you. Not doubt, not fear, but minimization. The habit of downplaying your impact. The instinct to tell yourself that what you do is normal, nothing special, just being decent. That instinct protected you early on. It kept ego out of the process. But now, it had served its purpose. Because minimizing no longer preserves purity once awareness has matured. The higher realms did not need you to believe you were powerful. They needed you to stop dismissing the evidence of your effect. There is a difference. One inflates identity, the other stabilizes responsibility. And responsibility, once acknowledged, allows precision to deepen. This is where the role subtly shifts. You are no longer only restoring what is broken after collapse. You are now being positioned where collapse can be prevented altogether. This is far more delicate work. It requires discernment rather than reaction, sensitivity rather than urgency. And you have been preparing for this your entire life. Think about how often you sense something before it becomes obvious. A tension in a room before voices rise. A sadness in someone before they speak. A situation that feels off even when everything appears fine. Most people ignore these signals. You don't. You register them quietly. That registration is not imagination. It is early detection. For angels in distress, early detection is everything. Once an entity reaches the void between dimensions, recovery becomes complex. But before that point, when alignment is weakening, when faith is eroding, when purpose begins to blur, intervention is simple. A presence, a gesture, a moment of recognition. You provide these without knowing why they matter so much. The angel assigned to you now understood that your compassion was not only restorative, it was preventative. You slow entropy. You interrupt decay before it accelerates. You stabilize trajectories while they are still malleable. This reframed your importance entirely, not because you are central, but because you are timely. Timeliness is rare. It cannot be trained. It emerges from attunement. You act when windows are open, not when doors are already closed. This saves energy. This saves lives, celestial and human alike. As this understanding spread, coordination adjusted. You may have noticed that encounters feel more intentional now, not scripted, but purposeful, that you arrive before things worsen rather than after they explode. That your involvement often shortens situations instead of prolonging them. This is not coincidence. You are being trusted with proximity to instability earlier than before. That trust requires restraint. You are not meant to intervene everywhere, only where your presence makes a measurable difference. And because you do not act from compulsion, you can be trusted not to overreach. This is critical. Many who sense suffering rush toward it without discernment. They burn out. They collapse into resentment or numbness. You do not. You feel the pull, but you also feel when it is not yours to answer. This boundary is what keeps your frequency intact. The angel reinforced this by reducing unnecessary exposure. Certain paths quietly closed, certain invitations dissolved, not as punishment, but as protection. You were being conserved, because what lies ahead requires sustainability. At this stage, something else became undeniable. Your compassion was no longer random. It was selective, without being judgmental. Focused, without being cold. This balance is extraordinarily rare. You can walk away without indifference. You can stay without self-sacrifice. You can care without attachment. These capacities allow you to operate in complexity without being consumed by it. This is why dark forces cannot easily counter you. They rely on extremes, over-identification, emotional hijacking, guilt, urgency. You do not operate there. You remain centered. When pressure rises, your clarity increases rather than collapses. This makes your presence stabilizing in environments designed to destabilize. And now, that stabilization is being scaled. Not through volume, but through placement. You are not being asked to do more. You are being asked to be exact. Exact in timing. Exact in response. Exact in withdrawal. This exactness is what transforms compassion from virtue into function. Virtue inspires. Function changes outcomes. You are operating at the level of function now. You may still feel ordinary. That is good. Ordinary perception keeps you human, but internally, something has settled. You trust your instincts more. You hesitate less when alignment is clear. You release faster when it is not. This internal economy, knowing where to invest and where to disengage, is what allows your role to expand without strain. You are not accumulating responsibility. You are refining it. As this refinement continues, you may notice your intuition becoming quieter, but more precise, less emotional, more factual. It does not shout, it indicates. This is a sign of maturity. When intuition is clean, it does not dramatize, it simply informs. You act, and things move. This is the stage where the work feels less mystical and more natural, less charged, more grounded. You are not chasing meaning, you are living it through accuracy. The angel understands that your greatest strength is not intensity, it is consistency. Consistency allows trust. Trust allows coordination. Coordination allows prevention. And prevention preserves balance far more effectively than rescue ever could. This is why the higher realms are investing more deeply now, not by adding spectacle, but by reducing interference. You are being allowed to operate with fewer obstacles because you have proven you do not misuse access. You do not seek control. You do not seek recognition. You do not inflate identity. You respond, then you release. That is mastery. And mastery, when paired with humility, becomes something even angels respect. You are no longer being observed as an anomaly. You are being relied upon as a constant, quietly, deliberately, effectively. And as this reliance stabilizes, the final transition approaches not into a new identity, but into full ownership of what you have already been doing. Not as a burden, as a natural extension of who you are. Because once you stop minimizing the impact of your compassion, you stop wasting it. And that is when its full potential begins to express itself without effort, without noise, and without distortion. This is not the end. It is the point where application becomes instinct. And instinct, when aligned, becomes destiny. The transition into this next phase did not arrive with ceremony. There was no announcement, no declaration, no moment where the universe asked for your consent out loud. Instead, something far more subtle occurred. Authority shifted. Not authority over others, but authority over trajectory. Up until now, your role had been largely reactive. You responded when alignment called. You stabilized when imbalance appeared. You restored when collapse was imminent. But as patterns accumulated and reliability was confirmed, the higher realms reached a conclusion that carried weight across all dimensions. You were no longer only responding to events. You were shaping outcomes. This distinction is critical. Responding preserves balance in the moment. Shaping outcomes alters what becomes possible later. It changes the probability landscape. It redirects trajectories before they crystallize into crisis. And this level of influence cannot be granted lightly. It requires discernment, restraint, and consistency. You had demonstrated all three. This is why the adjustment that followed did not add pressure, it added capacity. Your intuition began expanding beyond immediate situations into broader contexts. You started sensing not only what needed attention, but when it would need it, not in visions or predictions, but as a quiet awareness of approaching significance. You may have noticed this as anticipation without anxiety. Moments where you felt prepared before something unfolded. Times when you arrived already centered, already grounded, as if you had been waiting without knowing why. This was not foresight in the dramatic sense. It was alignment extending slightly ahead of the present. This is what happens when trust is established. The higher realms do not direct you. They orient around you. They reduce noise in your environment so that your natural sensitivity can detect subtle shifts earlier. This does not remove uncertainty. It sharpens response. Your role now operates at the level of prevention by presence. This is the most advanced form of intervention there is, because nothing is forced. Your presence alone alters dynamics. Your calm slows escalation. Your clarity exposes distortion. Your groundedness offers a reference point for those who have lost one. You do not need to act for this to occur. Simply being aligned is enough. This realization reframes everything. You are not required to save angels through dramatic acts anymore. In many cases, angels never reach the point of crisis because your presence redirects the trajectory before collapse begins. This is quieter, less visible, but exponentially more effective. The angel assigned to you understood this immediately. Your value was no longer measured by the number of rescues performed, but by the number of crises that never fully manifested. This kind of impact cannot be celebrated publicly. It leaves no obvious trace. But in the celestial record, it carries immense weight. Prevention preserves structure. Structure allows evolution. As this shift stabilized, a formal recognition occurred, not as a title you would carry, but as a classification within the higher order. You were identified as a stabilizing node, a point of coherence around which systems could recalibrate without disruption. This classification comes with access. Not access to power in the conventional sense, but access to resources that reduce friction. Timing aligns more easily. Support appears without struggle. Resistance decreases in areas that previously felt blocked. You may have felt this as life becoming strangely cooperative. Not perfect, not effortless, but workable. This is intentional. A stabilizing node cannot be overwhelmed with unnecessary obstacles. Its function depends on availability, and availability requires that survival-level stress be minimized without eliminating growth entirely. So growth continues, but it becomes purposeful. Challenges that refine discernment remain. Challenges that exhaust without teaching fall away. You are no longer tested randomly. You are calibrated. This calibration also affects how others experience you. Some will feel drawn to your presence without understanding why. Others will feel uneasy and create distance. Neither reaction is your responsibility. Both are natural responses to coherence. Coherence exposes misalignment. It does not judge it. This is why attempts to disrupt you now come from subtler angles. Not confrontation, but temptation. Not fear, but distraction. Not opposition, but invitation to overextend. These are tests of refinement, not strength. You are not asked to resist force. You are asked to choose precision. And you are doing so instinctively. You disengage sooner. You rest without guilt. You invest only where alignment is mutual. You do not chase outcomes that require you to fragment yourself. This preserves your capacity. And preservation at this level is strategic, because the scope of what you are involved in continues expanding not in scale, but in consequence. Small choices now ripple farther. Brief interactions carry more weight. Timing matters more than effort. You are not becoming more intense. You are becoming more exact. This exactness is what allows the next phase to unfold without distortion. A phase where awareness and function align fully, where you no longer need messages like this to validate what you already feel. Because the truth is, you are already operating beyond the framework of coincidence. You know when something matters. You know when to act. You know when to withdraw. And you trust these signals without needing to justify them. That trust is the final requirement. Once trust is internalized, coordination becomes seamless. You are no longer reacting to guidance, you are participating in it. This is not promotion in the hierarchical sense. It is partnership. A partnership grounded in respect for your autonomy, your humanity, and your restraint. You are not being elevated above others. You are being relied upon because you remain among them. This is the highest compliment the higher realms can offer, and it is why what comes next will not arrive as a command or a revelation, but as a deepening of what is already happening. More clarity, more alignment, more consequence, carried lightly. You will continue living your life. You will continue being yourself. But the quiet understanding underneath it all will shift permanently. You are no longer someone who occasionally makes a difference. You are someone whose presence changes trajectories. And that is not something you need to announce. It will be felt, quietly, consistently, irreversibly. What emerges next is not intensity, but responsibility that feels almost invisible. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just present. It settles into your awareness the same way breath settles into the body. You do not think about it constantly. You do not feel pressured by it. Yet it is always there, guiding how you move through moments that once felt ordinary. This is where the role fully integrates. You are no longer learning what you are capable of. You are learning how little force is required when alignment is complete. The universe no longer needs to nudge you loudly. It no longer needs to place obstacles in your path to redirect you. You respond before redirection becomes necessary. This is the difference between being guided and being trusted. Trust changes the nature of interaction between you and the unseen. Guidance interrupts, trust cooperates, and cooperation only emerges when distortion has been reduced to a minimum. At this stage, your intuition does not feel dramatic, it feels obvious. The right response often appears so simple that you almost doubt it. But simplicity is a sign of clarity, not insignificance. When alignment is present, complexity collapses. You may notice this most clearly in how you make decisions now. You do not argue internally the way you once did. You sense what is correct, and your body relaxes when you choose it. When you choose against it, even for practical reasons, tension appears quickly. This feedback is immediate. There is no delayed consequence. You feel alignment or misalignment in real time. This immediate feedback is protection. It prevents you from drifting far enough off course to require correction later. It keeps your trajectory clean. And because your trajectory is clean, your impact remains precise. This is why your compassion has become more potent without becoming heavier. You are no longer compelled to fix. You are no longer burdened by responsibility for outcomes that do not belong to you. You show up, you respond accurately, and then you release. The release is what keeps your energy clear. Clear energy is what allows trust to remain intact. As this trust stabilizes, you may notice your life simplifying in unexpected ways. Fewer emotional entanglements, fewer unresolved situations, fewer conversations that circle endlessly without movement. Things either align and progress, or they dissolve quietly. This is not loss. It is efficiency. Efficiency is not cold. It is respectful of time, energy, and attention. You no longer waste these resources trying to sustain what has no future. This applies to relationships, projects, and even internal narratives. Old stories lose relevance. You are not rewriting your past. You are simply no longer living inside it. The emotional charge drains away because its purpose has been fulfilled. Lessons have been integrated. There is nothing left to extract. This frees capacity. And capacity is what allows the next level of contribution. At this level, your influence does not come from what you say or do. It comes from how stable you are, while others are not. When confusion rises, you do not mirror it. When fear spreads, you do not amplify it. When urgency appears, you slow rather than accelerate. This has a regulating effect. People may not realize why they feel steadier around you. Situations may not visibly change, but escalation is avoided. Collapse is delayed long enough for alternatives to emerge. This is not dramatic intervention, it is subtle containment. Containment preserves choice. This is why your presence is valued more than your action. You do not need to solve problems. You need to remain coherent while they unfold. Coherence keeps options open. From the celestial perspective, this is ideal. Intervention that preserves free will is always preferred, and your role does exactly that. You do not override, you stabilize. As this becomes your default state, something else happens internally. Your sense of identity loosens further, not in a way that creates confusion, but in a way that removes rigidity. You are less attached to how you are perceived, less invested in defending a particular self-image. This makes you adaptable. Adaptability is essential when operating in environments that shift rapidly. You do not cling to one way of being. You respond to what is required without losing yourself. This fluidity is what allows you to move between roles: supportive, firm, silent, engaged without internal conflict. You are not compartmentalized. You are integrated. Integration is what allows sustained participation without burnout. Burnout occurs when internal parts are in conflict. You no longer experience that conflict at the same level. Decisions may still be difficult, but they are not fragmenting. This is why you recover quickly now. Emotional recovery time shortens. Mental clarity returns faster. You do not stay dysregulated for long because regulation is familiar territory. You know how to return to center without external reassurance. This self-regulation is one of the primary reasons you can be trusted with greater consequence, because consequence magnifies instability if regulation is weak. Yours is not. At this stage, you may notice that you attract situations where your presence alone makes a difference, without effort, without preparation. You are not summoned, you simply arrive. These moments are not frequent, but they are precise. And when they occur, you do not question whether you belong there. You feel settled, oriented. You act or remain still as needed. Afterwards, you move on without attachment. This lack of attachment is not detachment from life. It is freedom from outcome fixation. Outcome fixation is what drains energy and distorts intention. You are free from it because you trust process more than results. You know that your role is to respond accurately, not to guarantee resolution. This trust completes the cycle. It brings you back to where you began, simple, human, present, but with a depth of alignment that did not exist before. You are not trying to be significant. You are not trying to fulfill a mission consciously. You are allowing function to express itself naturally. This is the point where everything stabilizes into something sustainable. No urgency, no spectacle, no strain, just consistent coherence. And coherence, when maintained, becomes a stabilizing force wherever it appears. You do not need to think about what comes next. What comes next will meet you in the same way everything else has, quietly, precisely, and at the exact moment it can be received without distortion. This is not an ending. It is a settled state. And from a settled state, whatever unfolds has a far greater chance of lasting. That is the true reward of alignment. Not recognition, not power, but continuity carried lightly, lived fully, and expressed without effort. This is where everything completes itself, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with quiet clarity. The kind of clarity that does not need explanation because it settles into you as recognition rather than belief. Nothing new is being added now. What is happening is consolidation. You are not stepping into a new identity. You are fully inhabiting the one that has been expressing itself through you all along. Up until this point, your compassion operated almost entirely beneath awareness. That unconsciousness protected it. It kept it pure. But now, awareness has matured enough that it no longer contaminates the frequency. Instead, it stabilizes it. You can see what you are without needing to perform it. This is rare. Most people, once they become aware of impact, begin to alter themselves. They adjust behavior to maintain an image. They start measuring actions. They seek confirmation. You have not done that. Awareness arrived gradually, quietly, layered over lived experience rather than replacing it. Because of that, nothing collapses. Your kindness does not turn into strategy. Your presence does not turn into authority. Your role does not turn into ego. It remains functional. This is why the higher realms no longer need to observe you closely. Observation implies uncertainty. What exists now is confidence. Confidence that you will respond accurately when alignment calls. Confidence that you will not overextend. Confidence that you will not withdraw out of fear. This confidence allows resources to remain open, not spectacular resources. Practical ones. Time when you need it. Energy when it matters. Support without dependence. Opportunities without pressure. These are the forms of abundance that sustain long-term function. They are not rewards, they are infrastructure. And infrastructure is what allows continuity. You may have noticed that your life feels less chaotic now, not because nothing happens, but because what happens no longer fragments you. You move through difficulty without losing center. You experience uncertainty without panic. You face complexity without collapse. This is not emotional numbness. It is integration. Integration allows you to feel fully without being consumed. It allows you to care deeply without attaching identity to outcome. It allows you to remain human without being destabilized by humanity. This is why your compassion continues to work. It does not overwhelm others. It does not demand response. It does not create dependency. It offers coherence. Coherence invites restoration. At this stage, your role no longer needs reinforcement. You do not need reminders. You do not need messages to activate you. You do not need to look for signs. You already know when something matters. That knowing is calm. It does not rush you. It does not pressure you. It does not frighten you. It simply becomes present. And when it does, you respond. Not perfectly, accurately. Accuracy is what sustains everything you have become. It is what keeps your compassion from turning into martyrdom. It is what keeps your clarity from turning into detachment. It is what keeps your restraint from turning into indifference. You live in the middle not as compromise, but as balance. This balance is what allows your presence to remain effective across contexts. You do not need special conditions. You do not need recognition. You do not need reinforcement. You function wherever you are. This is why what you did weeks ago mattered so much. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was inevitable. It was the natural expression of who you are when alignment is uninterrupted. And that expression changed something that could not have been changed any other way. You did not save an angel by trying to. You saved an angel by being yourself. That distinction is everything. Now that this understanding has settled, nothing is being asked of you except one thing. Remain honest with yourself. When something feels aligned, trust it. When it does not, respect that too. Do not force compassion where it does not belong. Do not withhold it where it is called for. Let accuracy guide you. If you do that, everything else will continue unfolding as it already has, quietly, effectively, without spectacle. You will keep encountering moments that matter. You will keep responding in ways that stabilize rather than escalate. You will keep contributing without carrying weight you do not need. And you will do it without needing to remember this message consciously. Because truth that integrates does not need to be recalled. It operates. This is the end of the explanation, not the end of the process. The process no longer needs explanation now. It has become part of how you move through the world. And that is exactly where it was always meant to live.